Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Wednesday, April 10th, 2024. I'm John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
And Washington commentary columnist Matthew Continetti. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John.
So to start with the new news first, we got an inflation number for the month this morning just before we hit air, and it's not good. It's worse than people expected. And what's interesting about it, as far as I can tell, is that the places where inflation is the worst are the things that are the most expensive. So think about this logically. So we've been talking about how it was terrible for Biden, or it was terrible in general, that food prices were, up during 2022, 2023, right? Eggs and milk and all that. And it's not as though those prices have fallen precipitously. Inflation still grows, as inflation will. So each time you have a circumstance like that, things kind of settle into a new normal. But housing, cars, car insurance, car repairs, expensive things, elder care, nursing, things that are expensive for Americans, and particularly middle-class Americans, are accelerating at the rate 2 or 3 times the 3.4% rate that was reported this morning. So I don't know what to make of this, except it is bad news for the president. It's not only it's bad news for the country, but that I think the hope that many people had that the Fed was going to start cutting rates, which I always thought seemed to be illusory and more like a kind of democratic wish fulfillment fantasy than a reality that they would cut rates, that they may be more inclined, particularly if next month shows the same thing as this month, to increase rates, to do what they can to bite this off before it spirals upward again.
Well, there's a lot to unpack here, beginning with the Fed. As you said, John, it's very unlikely that the Fed will cut rates with inflation coming in this high and continuing to do so over several months. And so this illusion, I think you're right, or this kind of political desire on some part of the Fed governors, some of the doves, and then the Biden administration that they would cut rates before the election. This report, I think, really closes the door on that. Now, the second thing is this economy is hot. I mean, we had the jobs report last Friday showing above expected some 300,000 new jobs. Often those are revised down, but sometimes figures are revised up. In any case, jobs are being created, consumers are spending, and so it's silliness, I think, to believe that this inflation will go away on its own. What's causing it? Well, the Biden administration domestic policy is strict supply and subsidized demand on everything. Spend, 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 but do not provide more opportunities for productive investment. Do not expand energy resources here in the United States. Do not lift the heavy hand of government over regulations. So you're kind of quelching the entrepreneurial spirit while feeding the beast of consumers and government spending like a drunken sailor. So Biden is in a pickle because, he loves talking up these numbers, the job numbers, the growth numbers. But the other side of the coin is the inflation numbers, which could doom him. I mean, as you said, rents have gone up from, say you were paying $1,600 a month in rent when Biden was inaugurated. You're now paying $2,000. When Biden was inaugurated, the interest rate on a 30-year mortgage was 2.7%. It's now 6.8%. and just crushing people with housing. And your grocery cart, if it cost $100 in January 2021, is now costing you $125. And this, people are blaming Biden, and this explains, I think, why his approval ratings are so low and why the presidential race is so close.
Yeah, I think it's important to note, or just to highlight that it's not like these numbers now dictate what people feel. They are a summation of what people have been experiencing already. Collecting them, putting them out now, updating them, just makes it extraordinarily hard for the president to make the arguments in the face of what people have been experiencing up until now.
I think it's also important to note that job creation, and the fact that more people are employed and have wage growth is not, despite the way people talk about this, itself inherently inflationary. That would be a mistake. If that were the case, then a full employment economy would be an economy rampant with inflation. And we know from the 1980s that that does not necessarily have to be the case. So you have to ask yourself, what is it, if you have a hot economy, what is it that is generating the inflation? And I think Matt's right that we have a market distortion effect from a government, and in this case, not just Biden, but the Republicans as well, contributing without restraint. So we have a player in the market, this, in some ways, the largest single player, even though we have a free market, a public forum market, that is behaving in ways that are inflationary, but that, if there were some level of restraint or some level of, let's say, government not itself just implicitly growing every month and, all of that, we might be in a position where the job growth would be accompanied by a relatively static or lowering inflation rate. And then you really would have a kind of return to, happy days are here again. It's morning in America. All we get from liberals is this. There's no reason. The American people say that things are bad and they're lying to themselves. It's not true. Look at all these macroeconomic statistics. And the simple fact is that if you have to take your car in to get fixed and it costs 3 times what it did 4 years ago, that wipes out your economic benefit, right?
But
if
it's
you
also
have to
the
pay
case
$1,000 to fix your car, the money that you just earned over what you made last year, half of it is wiped away. And so you're not going to feel good about that. I'm sorry.
But it's also that the administration loves to rely on things like, Putin's price hike and things like that, when the core inflation doesn't include those things at all. So inflation is up 3.5%. Core inflation is up a bit higher than in overall inflation, 3.8%. So the energy prices are not included in that. Food is not included in that. So the excuses that they give are, hey, that 3.4% is weighed down by volatile food prices or Putin's energy price hike. But if you take those things out, inflation went up further. It went up more, went up 0.5 point more beyond that if you take food and gas out. So that's something that's really hurting them, is that they're ignoring the fact that, and I'm not saying you should use this measure or this measure. What I'm saying is core inflation is just a way for them to understand what people are actually dealing with, because it's the things that don't jump around in price so much. And so it's just a sort of steady thing. So if you want to understand what people are actually feeling, the core inflation is just a sign of things that are steadily climbing. And these are things that also, it's not just the big purchases, as you say, which, can sort of wipe out savings in a minute, but it's also the steady climb of this stuff over all this time. eats away at those savings too. You're getting hit from both ends. But I think that the administration has to sort of drop the idea that things are going on in the world, and so energy prices go up and stuff like that. And they are also talking about, the administration also reprimanded Ukraine for certain attacks on Russian oil refineries because the administration was worried about energy prices. Now, energy prices is a real thing to worry about. But again, that's not the same thing as inflation.
You don't have to drop the arguments. You drop your whole economic policy. I mean, John, as you were saying, you don't have to go to the 80s or the 90s to find an American economy with full employment and low inflation. You can go back to Trump.
Right.
I mean, that's what we had in 2019, full employment, no inflation. So what's the difference between Trump's economic policy and Biden's? Well, on trade, they're pretty much similar. Trump is tariff man. Biden has kept the tariffs, and he's, if anything, pursued the tech war with China more diligently. And of course, the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, that's really working well. That imposed many tariffs on our allies in terms of green energy. So where are the differences between the two policies? Well, the energy policy is completely different. Trump letting loose American energy exploration here at home. Biden restricting domestic carbon energy supplies while shoveling money into the green energy fiasco. Tax policy is different, right? Biden hasn't been able to increase taxes, but I think many investors and financial planners assume that if he's elected in November, taxes will go up on corporations and individuals. Labor policy is different. Biden's much more of a union guy. You're restricting the supply of labor. Look at things like what happened in California with the minimum wage laws going into effect, of course, with the loophole for Governor Gavin Newsom's one of his companies. And the antitrust policy, too. I mean, it's just ridiculous. We had these magnificent 7 companies, corporations like Apple, Tesla, Google,
Amazon.
All of them now are under Lina Khan's thumb and subject to investigation. So what's the point then of investing further in these companies? This is a Biden policy problem. And until he changes the policies on the fiscal side, on the regulatory side, I don't think inflation is going to abate.
I think the mistake that Democratic analysts and people who want Biden to win in November and all of that make when they talk about this is these numbers are a diagnosis. So they should be used by honest people looking at the macro economy to say, where are we going wrong? Maybe there are corrections we can make, or maybe the corrections would make things worse or wouldn't be efficient or something like that. They look at these numbers as a report card, and what they want is a good report card that they can brandish. But it's more like, or, sort of like a reward for results. But if you're smart, and if you're like a smart person dealing in politics, you take these reports and you go huddle in a room and say, what is this telling us that we might be able to repair by September to help us by November? Instead, everything got backwards. It was like these numbers are supposed to be propaganda for us to sell our message that we're doing well. And as a result, when they don't come in the right way, like people start panicking. Liberals start panicking. It's like, it wasn't supposed to be like this. Experts said inflation would be lower this month. Use it. Use what it's telling you to change course.
Well, there's a very interesting, basically a hot mic moment that was reported this morning, that the former chief of staff, Ron Klain, was telling some group, I don't know whether it was donors or not, but he was caught on a hot mic saying the president's acting like he's a congressman going to all these bridge openings and ribbon cutting ceremonies when voters are really struggling with these price increases. So why isn't he talking about inflation more? So I think some of the members of the Biden inner circle are aware of it. Of course, Klain is outside of government right now. We don't know how influential he is in the operation, but they are aware that it's a huge problem, and they can't continually to point to things like the job report because, yeah, of course, people want jobs, but on the other hand, people really dislike this price increase.
You just
and they
said something.
Think that he's aloof, and they're blaming him.
You said something really important, which is that people want jobs, but this again is a misunderstanding of what the job numbers are, and always has been, which is most people have a job. Throughout the worst of everything over the last 20 years, at least 90% of people who wanted a job had a job. At the worst moment, right, when the unemployment rate hit 10% right after the financial meltdown, individual people have jobs. When we were at full employment in 2017, 2018, everybody who wanted a job had a job. Then there was a crisis. Then there was the distortion of COVID. Now everybody who wants a job has a job. And most people have been employed steadily without let up throughout this entire period. They don't care about the jobs numbers. They're employed. The macroeconomic meaning of the jobs numbers has no effect on the already employed. It's a meaningless statistic to them. What matters is what happens to them personally. That's inflation. So yeah, you can walk around and say we have the best economy in 50 years because everybody's employed. How much credit did Trump actually get for that when he was president? Not that much. He really didn't get that much. It's not like, his approval rating soared over 50% and everybody loved him, because that's not anything that has a direct impact.
Well, the economy was as strong as this year.
No, it was. But I'm now specifically talking about jobs. Jobs is a thing where people say, right, we need to talk about jobs and we have to talk about jobs. And actually, in an electoral context in the United States, you don't have to talk about jobs. You may have to talk about wages. You may want to talk about how wages are stagnating. You might want to talk about how it's not so easy to move from job to job, which was the case for about 15 years. But joblessness is not a political issue in the United States, or lots of jobs is a secondary or ancillary benefit if you're like trying to make an argument about how wonderful the economy is. But it doesn't matter that much to any individual person who has likely been employed without let up their entire adult lives. So economic impact is based on what people experience day to day when they're paying their bills or, trying to put money aside or go on vacation or something like that. And that just has been lousy, period. And telling people that it's not lousy is like telling a person who says, I have a sore throat, you don't really have a sore throat. Like, how do you know? Who are you to say that person doesn't have a sore throat? You're saying, if you say it, you're saying you're a hypochondriac. You don't really have a sore throat. That's a very positive message to try to get someone to like you and think that you're sympathetic to them, to tell them that they're not experiencing what they say they're experiencing.
And, Biden needs to reap the whirlwind here also for naming a clean energy boondoggle the Inflation Reduction Act. And then are having 2 years after of this kind of inflation. You don't just get away with that when this is the situation. People don't like that. He should have to face some questions and challenges about that ridiculous act.
Well, let's talk about Biden. Let's move to a more far darker and stranger thing that happened last night. Apparently last week, it's very weird. Last week, Biden gave an interview to Univision that was held back for a week. It took place like last Wednesday or last Thursday, and then they only released it yesterday. Don't quite understand what's going on there because it's very newsworthy what he said, unless it was a deal and they embargoed. I don't know. It's on their special show. They wanted better ratings for. I don't understand it. Anyway, he says Israel should just set up a unilateral ceasefire for 6 to 8 weeks to let all aid and food and everything pass freely around Gaza. He said this last week right before he came out and blasted Israel for what happened with the World Central Kitchen. And before the administration announced Israel had to change policy and where they were going to change our policy and all of that. So again, is he senile? Was he establishing new policy last week that was somehow kept from the American people, where the United States is now advocating a unilateral ceasefire on the part of Israel to allow Hamas 8 weeks to regroup, while Hamas itself is not subject to the terms of ceasefire?
I think to understand what he's trying to say, you have to turn to the most important journalist in America these days, Thomas L. Friedman of the New York Times, who basically puts on a bulletin board every couple weeks what the Biden administration policy is in the Mideast. And so I'll just read the next to last paragraph in Tom Friedman's column today. He writes, quote, "President Biden has a plan. Get to a 6-week ceasefire and hostage release, after which, as part of the Saudi normalization package, the president will come out with a bold peace initiative, what Israeli peace process expert Gidi Grinstein has called more for more security and normalization with Arab states than Israel was ever offered, and more Arab and U.S. help for Palestinians to achieve statehood than they've ever experienced. Hopefully, such an initiative can induce everyone to make the ceasefire permanent and further marginalize Hamas and Iran." Close quote. No, what's the most important word in that paragraph? Hopefully, because it rests on a total illusion that this would succeed because of the good intentions of the evil people who run Hamas and Iran. And it gets even better in the last paragraph of Friedman's column. He says, quote, "I have read all the articles about how a two-state solution is now impossible. I think they are 95% correct, but I'm going to focus on the 5% chance that they are wrong and the chance that courageous leadership can make them wrong." Close quote.
So what you're saying is that Friedman is now adopting the Dumb and Dumber foreign policy,
Yeah.
right? The scene in Dumb and Dumber when Jim Carrey says to Lauren Holly, "What chance do we have together?" And she says, 1 in a billion. And he says, "So there's a chance."
Yes. Yeah. So you say it's the
focus on the 5%.
Right. It's the 1% doctrine in reverse.
Yeah.
Right. Wasn't that was Cheney's after 9/11? He says if there's a 1%,
right.
Yeah, if there's a 1% chance that the
world is destroyed.
Right. This rogue state is going to acquire nuclear weapons and give them to Al-Qaeda. We can't afford that. So we have to act in Iraq.
Yeah.
This is, there's a 5% chance that my cockamamie scheme to establish peace in the Middle East after decades and decades of irreconcilable conflict between the Palestinians and the Israelis, well, we're going to just do that, and we're going to ignore the realities on the ground, which says this deal would not fly at all.
We should note, by the way, that this is in line with how Biden's been the whole time with communications, that they clarified and walked back either this statement or the broad interpretations of what he said in the interview. He said that he was referring to the truce being negotiated by his administration that would see some 40 hostages released over a period of 6 to 8 weeks. Quote, and this is what they talked to the Times of Israel, because the Times of Israel called them out on it. There is no change in our position. President was reiterating our long-standing position. We are calling for an immediate ceasefire that would last for at least 6 weeks as part of a hostage deal. And then the person who responded to the Times of Israel said his quote makes that clear. So,
okay,
whatever we're all misinterpreting, the president was very clear. And now that we've been informed that the president is clear after about 12 or 14 hours of this discussion, I suppose we can readjust our priors or something like that. But this is very typical of Biden. This was 7 days ago he said this, and it's released yesterday, and then it causes a thing, and then he says that's not what I meant. And so we're some 7 or 8 days after he says something about the most important foreign policy issue on his plate. We're again back to the Talmudic debates over what was really said and meant.
Tony Blinken yesterday said he didn't understand why people don't talk more about Hamas and its responsibility for what's going on.
Yeah.
Well, gee, I know why.
Look in the mirror.
What did you do all week but blame Israel? So,
wait, not only blame Israel.
Yeah,
he defined the number one priority. He said it wasn't Hamas. It wasn't. It wasn't the hostages. It was feeding Gazans.
Yeah. So. Okay, we've had this whole argument now for 8 years about the meaning and the effect and the term gaslighting, right? Is Trump a gaslighter? Are we being gaslit? Who's gaslighting us? And how's gaslighting going? And I've been thinking that the Biden people have been engaged in a game of gaslighting to Israel's benefit in some ways, at least because they have all these pressures on them to go bad on Israel, and they haven't suspended the arms trade and that sort of thing, and that maybe last week the gaslighting ended. Now I think they really just are situationally incoherent, and that there is nothing larger, and that the comedy, the bizarre comedy of Tom Friedman trying to put lipstick on this pig is itself a kind of astounding thing, because they say whatever they have to say at the moment that they have to say it. That's the story. It's not that, John Kirby is sending out this message, but Bill Burns is in Cairo or Doha sending out that message, and this one is here, and there's Amos Hochstein is in Lebanon talking to the Hezbollah, and so there's a lot of things going on. And now I just think it's like 11 o'clock. Somebody in Dearborn's plumbing, backed up, and now they have to say Israel is evil. But then at 3 o'clock, something else happens, and then they say Israel is good, and they're not gaslighting. They are terrible at this. They are terrible at managing the foreign policy relating to this very simple issue, which is that our ally was attacked by a terrorist army that has hundreds of people underground in tunnels, and they themselves are in tunnels, and they run a totalitarian state on Israel's border, and Israel's going to end them. I don't care what Dearborn says. I don't care that Columbia Law School voted to divest, the student council voted to divest from Israel. This is not a hard call.
But that's actually also a really important part of this particular interview that you mentioned, because you asked earlier, why are they doing an interview where they talk about Israel, an obviously volatile situation that is front page news no matter what the president says, right? When the president makes a comment about this conflict, everybody reports it on the front page. Why are they doing this interview to be aired a week later? And this is part of it too. What they did with the Univision was they sat down and there's a whole package apparently of interviews. This is one of them, and they're also doing an interview with one of his advisors and stuff like that. He got a lot of criticism because apparently Univision got a lot of criticism. Because apparently the last interview they did with Biden was so softball that even Biden's supporters were like, "This is kind of ridiculous. Like, ask him questions, please." And so they're doing this to sort of mend ties and show that the president can handle a tough interview or whatever it is. But they planned this. I mean, the president's team was well aware that this was going to be a package of interviews that was going to start airing a week later.
That's my point. You have raised the question, and I am now giving you the answer. Nobody is planning nothing.
I disagree.
Okay.
They are not managing the foreign policy at all. They are trying to manage the optics. Everything that the administration is doing in response to this is an optics operation. That is how they are seeing all this. They're doing terrible in that sense. Yeah, it's terrible. It's disjointed. It's incoherent. It makes no sense. But that is how they view all of it. And the Jose Andres stuff, that was an optics nightmare for them. Has nothing to do with what's actually happening there. And of course, the Israel target, stupid, I mean, this is why they have gotten themselves into the position they are in. They are not actually talking about what needs to happen there, what the fact that our ally is in an existential war. This is not what they're addressing whenever they're speaking. They are addressing what they perceive to be the bad optics, and that's it.
Right, but they're also not like it. All right, so the president sits down with this interview 2 days after the World Central Kitchen strike happens, and he says, because the World Central Kitchen strike just happened, he's in "I'm angry at Israel" mode, and Israel just needs to do this. He says, but 2 days later, he's asked if Israel is doing what he asked them to do after the strike. And he says yes. So the timeline here is so he does an interview where he yells at Israel. 2 days later, he says, Israel's doing what I asked. Things are moving in the right direction. A day after that, Tony Blinken is asked the same question. Blinken says, yes, things are moving in the right direction. The Israelis are doing what we asked. 3 days later, the interview airs from before all those things from before the president said, yes, the Israelis are doing what we want them to do. It's like a rewind to before he had. So now it's like after he said, yes, the Israelis are doing what we do. We see him on an interview livid about the World Central Kitchen strike. It's bizarre.
Yeah, please.
Just one quick point. So much of this depends on something Biden cannot control. Hamas. And this deal has been going on for weeks now in Cairo, these negotiations. If every single time Hamas rejects the ceasefire and Hamas says, no, leave, end the war permanently, then maybe we'll release these hostages, who, by the way, it was just reported, they're once again saying we don't even know where they are. And many, of course, sadly, are most likely deceased. It's the same idiocy that has informed Biden's approach to Iran, which was for years before October 7th, we'll give you this deal. Come back to this deal. We're going to make it so good for you. We're going to be so nice to you. And every single time when it got to the point where you had to put the name on the paper, Ayatollah Khamenei said, no deal. To heck with you. Go, death to America. That's what I believe. And so much of this not only the leaks to Tom Friedman or the discussions that are transcribed by Tom Friedman or the different approaches to the optics, like we're saying, so much of it is silly because at the end of the day, it depends on this evil group of men who were not going to concede anything because they believe they're winning.
And they don't pretend that they're going to concede anything. Like, it's not like they're stringing anybody along.
Right.
So it's like, Bibi, you send your people to Egypt and you give them a mandate to make the deal to get the hostages out. Like, they weren't doing that anyway. Bibi says, okay, I am expanding their mandate to say whatever they have to say to get the hostages out. And then he does it, and they say, and Hamas says no. No, you know what? We'll study the offer, but no. And then what's the follow-on? They need to continue to negotiate to release the hostages. Hamas has said 7 times that it is not going to make this deal. Israel is being intransigent. The terms are too draconian. That meaning 1,000 prisoners released or 2,000 prisoners released, that's intransigent. It's all intransigent. I want to go back to the point.
Can I just say, before you do, can I just say just one quick on that point is just that we need to remember that the information that we found out yesterday that Hamas couldn't make the terms of the deal for the 40 Israeli hostages because the 40 Israeli hostages were coming from the so-called humanitarian category, and they haven't left 40 alive in the humanitarian category. We found this out yesterday, but I want to stress that this was something that the Biden administration, I believe, has known for 2 weeks. These are ongoing conversations. And so, for 2 weeks, they've been bashing Israel as intransigent. But during that time, they knew that there was no deal because Hamas killed too many of the hostages and Hamas couldn't fulfill its end of the deal.
Seth, I think it's important to note that detail has not been officially confirmed. Okay? We don't know that they said that. We keep getting reports. There were reports on Tuesday that Hamas said it isn't holding 40 living hostages. But that has not been confirmed by the government. It's a weird story. It was on one Israeli newscast. And so I just want to be cautious about this because, we actually started hearing about it on Monday, not even yesterday, or even Sunday night or something. And there's something fishy because it hasn't actually come out this way. But if we just pull back to
but also we've had stories since then about the negotiations and about how the Israelis came back and said, you just fill out the number with from the other category and we'll release more Palestinian prisoners. So there does seem to be
it's very hard to follow the thread is all I'm saying. Because if you really follow the logic of what they said, that means that the most vulnerable hostages are now dead, and Israel has not acknowledged that. And it beggars reason to think that they're all dead, but that somehow 21-year-old soldiers and young men are alive. It doesn't follow logically that they would, but it doesn't really matter. I just wanted to pull back to the Thomas Friedman point, which is, so there'll be a ceasefire for 6 weeks, and then my friend Giddy Grinstein, who does have this more for more policy, is a lovely guy, and I like him, and he's very smart, and he has all sorts of interesting things to say, but this is a preposterous idea. And I told him that it's a preposterous idea years ago, which is, you give the Palestinians a lot, they'll give us a lot, and then everything will be fine. They don't want a lot. They want everything. Their policy is we get everything, including your house, Giddy Grinstein. And you leave and go live in Atlanta, and we'll take everything, and you'll have nothing. That's, it's Michael Corleone with the Nevada senator. Okay, so more for more. It's a 5% chance, but gall dang it, it's worth taking it. What isn't he talking about? What he isn't talking about is that Israel is in preparations for a potential strike on Israeli soil from Iran, which would be the first direct military engagement between Israel and Iran ever. And they have a lot of chatter and there's a lot of noise and they're very concerned and they're doing exercises this week with reservists. And they're looking at Lebanon, where there's a lot of rocket fire coming into northern Israel that is landing harmlessly because no Israelis are living in northern Israel. So they're all standing there going, well, if we only get this, the hostages will be released, and then we'll get all this humanitarian aid into Gaza, and then there'll be a Saudi peace deal, and all these Arab countries are going to come in and rebuild Gaza, more for more. It's all fantastic. And inside Israel, they're preparing for another front war in Lebanon and fearing an aerial attack from their gravest enemy, and still fighting in Gaza. This is deranged. This is like, I don't even know what to describe it as. To say, here's the I'm going to offer you a sunny, optimistic future that could come in 6 weeks. It could all be over in 6 weeks, and then everything is going to be wonderful. And the country in which this is all happening is looking at a three-front war right now, at this very second, preparing for a three-front war. And I don't know if they're telling Friedman this. I don't know if Jake Sullivan is blowing smoke up Friedman's ass. I have no idea.
It's coercive diplomacy where the coercion is only applied to Israel.
To our ally.
That's what makes no sense. So think about points of leverage.
Which was attacked in an unprovoked assault of unprecedented scope by a terrorist group.
If you want Hamas to buckle and agree to some sort of ceasefire tied to a hostage release, you have different points of leverage. Israel has the military offensive and its control of the border crossings and allowing humanitarian aid into Gaza, most of which we now, I think, understand is stolen by Hamas. Right? Well, America...
That's okay, because if 5% gets in, I'm going to focus on the 5%. You may be focusing on the 95% stolen by Hamas, but that's just because you are one of those
what has happened? I know. Warmonger. So what has happened? America has essentially pressured Israel into stopping the offensive, right? Very little troop presence in Gaza now by the IDF. Rafah, the last Hamas stronghold, seems secure for Hamas at the moment. And America has pressured Israel into allowing more aid and opening additional crossings, thus feeding the enemy. So those 2 points of leverage against Hamas, they're off the table. What are America's points of leverage against Hamas? Well, we don't have much, but we do have our putative allies, Egypt and Qatar, right? So what are we doing there? Well, it doesn't seem like we're doing anything. It seems, in fact, that we're basically taking Egypt and Qatar's side against Israel. And instead of saying to Qatar, if you don't tell your homeboys in Cairo to agree to this, well, then we're going to start slapping sanctions on you. We're going to start affecting our relationship with you until you get the political echelon of Hamas out of your country so that Israel can find them down and kill them. Are we saying that? I don't think there's any evidence. To Sisi, are we saying anything to Sisi? When are you opening the border? Well, I don't think we're saying that.
They've making clear that they have made clear that they've been so constricted by their base that nobody believes that they would say, we'll move our air base out of Qatar if you don't do this. And in fact, the blowback would be so severe among the Democratic Party's base. That's who they seem to be afraid of these days. So Qatar is actually being protected by the same people that Hamas is getting all this. They're all in the same. They're all benefiting from the same.
Well, then there's no difference between Biden and Mike Johnson. There's no difference then. They're both scared of their bases, And that has led them to
So
complete
that's Mike
paralysis.
Johnson on Ukraine. That's Mike Johnson on
That's
Ukraine.
right.
Okay.
Right.
Now, I want to play my Tom Friedman fantasy football game with all the, with all the teams and all the pieces on the board and ask you guys a question about Biden and the, Muslims in Dearborn and, his fear and the young people who don't like Israel and all of that. So we know that there was this demonstration last week in Dearborn where people on U.S. soil, we don't know who they are, they could all be citizens or they could not be citizens, are shouting death to America. Here's my fantasy version of the Tom Friedman thing. Biden gets up and says, there are people in this country who, because we are supporting our Democratic ally against an unprecedented assault inside our country, who are chanting death to America. That is wrong. This is a disgusting, foul thing that is going on. These people are the worst of us. It's Charlottesville times 10. They're condemning America on American soil. They are using the slogan that was used when 52 American hostages were taken in 1970. They are using the slogan of the Islamic Republic of Iran. I will not stand for it. I am, hereby, announcing that the FBI will look into who these people are and try to make sense out of whether or not they are actually involved in terrorist activities against the United States, because this cannot stand. Now, we all know he will never say that, but let's just imagine that he did.
Chance.
Right. Let's just imagine that he did. Let's just imagine that after the riot in Teaneck, President came out to the microphones and said, a synagogue is hosting a meeting to raise money for a burial society, and people show up, spit on Jews, shout anti-Semitic slogans. That is not America. That is not our country. How dare they? They should all be arrested, whatever. That would seem to me to be a gimme. I'm sorry. Like, this is not Giddy Grinstein's more for more. Like, this is America. We don't do this. I said that what happened in Charlottesville was the reason that I ran for president. The same stuff is going on here now. I will not stand for it. It's not even a Sister Souljah moment. He's the president of the United States. People in Michigan are shouting death to America, and he's worried that he's going to lose their votes. Once again, I'm wondering if I'm taking crazy pills, because it doesn't seem to me that my fantasy scenario is too far off the truth. And if there is nobody in the Democratic Party who understands that this is an opportunity.
But John, this is one of the things that disturbs me so much about this, is that Biden's going along with the Hamas propaganda and the pro-Hamas hordes, buying into it, has excuse me, created an atmosphere where he's made it way more okay to do this kind of thing. He doesn't say it, but he doesn't say what you're talking about, which would be which would have been the normal, healthy thing for this country to come out and say and do. So if he were to do that now, it would be so anomalous. Because
fair enough.
Because the Democrat, the liberals, the press, they treat the Muslims of Michigan as if they are the voice of our national conscience. They're they're the ones who are speaking out about the family and friends who are suffering.
Right.
And if not for them, we'd be going headlong into supporting a genocide.
And that's the key also, because in terms of who they're speaking for, that's what we've really wanted Biden to confront this whole time, right? When we talk about who are the protesters speaking for, the protesters are out there saying intifada, intifada. The protesters are out there saying, we don't want no 2 states, we want 48. The protesters are out there saying decolonization and all this other stuff. So we've been begging essentially by, that's really the heart of the issue is, who are they speaking for?
Right.
And Biden has treated them as if they're speaking for the Palestinians that we're negotiating with over a 2-state solution. And yet these people are saying no 2-state solution. So who are they speaking?
But you're talking about policy toward Israel. Let's even move off that and say the president doesn't want to speak in favor of Israel at this delicate political moment. We're talking about people who are yelling death to America and spitting on American Jews as they go into a shul.
Karine Jean-Pierre was asked about this by a Fox News correspondent yesterday, and the correspondent asked the White House press secretary, does the president condemn this? And she responded, yes, he does. And then very curtly, kind of like, let's move on to something more important, the student loan giveaway.
Right.
And then the Fox News reporter said, well, is he going to make a statement? And Karine Jean-Pierre said, well, he doesn't need to. I speak for him here. So they've thought about what you're suggesting, John, and they've rejected it.
It's fascinating.
And also, by the way, on that, Karine Jean-Pierre in October, when the squad's rhetoric, a week or so after the attacks had gone to where the White House considered over the line, Karine Jean-Pierre called their rhetoric repugnant. She used the word repugnant, and that was aimed not at protesters in Dearborn. That was aimed at AOC and Rashida Tlaib, and Ilhan Omar and the rest. So that Matt tells you how far we've actually come in the wrong direction, right? Is that Karine Jean-Pierre herself was willing to say these members of Congress of the Democratic Party, their rhetoric is repugnant, and he won't even say that about nameless protesters who say death to him.
But Abe, you said they're treating the people of Dearborn as though they are the sort of spokesman for the Palestinian conscience or something like that. But they're treating them in two ways. They're treating them like that in some fundamental sense, but they are also treating them like they are rabid Dobermans who need to have stakes thrown at them or pacified, because what they're going to do is they're going to jump up and, the way Dobermans are the only dogs who will actually kill their owners, they're going to rip Joe Biden's throat out in Chicago. They don't care. The honey badger doesn't give a crap. They are going to take him down, and they're sitting there trying to figure out how to make that not happen. And I say they're being penny wise and pound foolish, because maybe he could gain a different kind of following or a different kind of support if he said, these people are now trashing our country. I'm the president of this country. They sicken me. How dare they?
I think we're in so much deeper.
Yeah, I know.
At this point, that it reminded me. It's kind of like the normalization of this, or the acceptance of this across the country, is reminded me of 2020, when the entire left said defund the police, and then there was a huge spike in violent crime across the country, and then the left said, no, we didn't mean defund the police. No. We meant augment the police. We meant move funds around to more to social programs, and we meant better training for the police. No. So I think they're still in the defund the police stage, and I hope to God that the spike in violent crime version of what this will have wrought isn't as bad as I suspect it is going to be, in the wake of having normalized this insane attitude in cities, on campuses, everywhere. So we'll see. And in the meantime, Israel has to defeat its enemy.
Right. But you're right, because we've already seen. I mean, what happened in Teaneck, we already saw. Now, granted, there were cops there and all of that, but people are now feeling free to shout Jew-hating slogans at people going into a place of worship, and they're not the Westboro Baptist Church.
And the media and the Democrats are in the mostly peaceful phase of the understanding of it.
And we had an argument, and we argued long ago in 2016 and beyond that a Trump victory might sort of be seen as a vindication of the people who said nasty things like this on the right, that we worried that they would see that if he could do this and just sort of wink at them and win anyway, it would officially normalize that sort of thing. And we have to confront the fact that although Biden is not the same person as Donald Trump, there is something of a worry about what happens if Biden is right and the strategy works. That's not good for us.
Okay,
right?
So
that's the other thing.
So let me offer you a savage irony here, right? Which is that Biden may not just have normalized this rhetoric on the left. There may be some peculiar way in which Biden is normalizing this rhetoric on the right. And I say that because of the horrifying thing that Tucker Carlson did yesterday on his show on X. He had on someone, a Palestinian Christian cleric, to talk about the evils that Israel does to Christians inside Israel, a cleric who opposes Israel's existence and supported Hamas and the attacks of October 7th. And of course, Tucker once again is only asking questions. I once again say, and without a lot of irony, that my role in his professional career as one of the people who hired him for the job that led to the rise of his stardom as a journalist is something for which I may have to reckon following my death when I go to the pearly gates. This display by Tucker, this anti-Semitic, Jew-hating platform that he has created, I think is sort of inextricable from the space that, weirdly enough, that Biden and the Arabs of Dearborn and all of that are
because the new right, particularly of Tucker's ilk, takes its cues from the left in all sorts of ways. They share the left's sense of grievance, the left's obsession with identity, and the sense of populism, and so instead of opposing what the worst of the left does, they want in on the game.
There's also the fact that Russia and Hamas are allied.
That's true too. Right, and that's what Eric Erickson said this morning on his Substack, that Tucker has now essentially become an enemy of the United States. He supports Russia over Ukraine. He supports Hamas. He is now actively supporting Hamas over Israel. We are allies in the just wars against the effort to suborn Ukraine and to destroy Israel, and he is now on the other side, and I deeply regret my role in his professional existence. I regret it as much as I regret almost anything that I've ever done, and that's a lot of things that I have regrets.
But you don't regret fast-growing trees, John.
Yes, I got to talk about fast-growing trees. Thank you, Matt. FastGrowingTrees.com. Did you know that it's the biggest online nursery in the U.S. with more than 10,000 different kinds of plants and over 2 million happy customers in the U.S.? They have everything you'd possibly want, like fruit trees, palm trees, evergreens, houseplants, and so much more. Whatever you're interested in, they have it for you. Find the perfect fit for your climate and space. Fast Growing Trees makes it easy to order online, and your plants are shipped directly to your door in 1 to 2 days. And along with their 30-day Thrive and Alive and Thrive guarantee, they offer free plant consultation forever. Matt, you are the newest Fast Growing Trees customer.
I am. And, we're very satisfied. My better half, she selected the Yoshino cherry tree, a hydrangea plant, and some knockout roses. The roses are already in bloom. I took a look at the cherry tree on my way to work this morning. I think it's already grown since it was planted just the other week. So indeed, a fast-growing tree, and they're wonderful. And I encourage everyone to go plant a tree. Earth Day isn't until a couple weeks here, but just go plant a tree. It'll make you feel better. It'll make the earth feel better. It'll make the tree will feel better. So go plant a tree.
So Fast Growing Trees has the best deals this spring, up to half off on select plants and others. And listeners to our show get an additional 15% off their first purchase when using the code commentary at checkout. That's an additional 15% off at fastgrowingtrees.com using the code commentary at checkout. Fastgrowingtrees.com, code commentary. Offer is valid for a limited time. Terms and conditions may apply. I have a fast breaking thing I think we need to close with, even though it's insanely depressing and we didn't get a chance to talk about the abortion decision in Arizona. We'll talk about it tomorrow. On the occasion of Eid al-Fitr, the end of Ramadan, our Secretary of State has just released this statement, or released it yesterday, but my sister Ruthie just sent this to me. Got to read this. As we near the end of the holy month of Ramadan, I wish Muslim communities everywhere Eid Mubarak and join in hopes for a safer and more peaceful world. Fine. As families and communities come together, we know they do so at a time when many Muslim communities worldwide are suffering. Our thoughts turn to the plight of Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank, civilians in Syria, women suffering under the Taliban in Afghanistan, Uyghurs in the People's Republic of China, Rohingya in Burma and Bangladesh, and far too many others. So Blinken has now drawn an explicit parallel between the efforts in China to extirpate the existence of the Uyghurs with the Israeli war against Hamas in Gaza and with the West Bank, where what the hell?
Yeah, where plenty of Palestinians went to the Dome of the Rock to celebrate peacefully the month of Ramadan. So
okay.
The two situations are completely separate. And by the way, what about all the Israeli Arabs who are living peacefully in the Jewish state?
So we have here a parallelism drawn between Palestinians, the 500,000 plus Syrians who have been murdered in Syria by a Muslim regime, women suffering under the Taliban in Afghanistan. Gee, why did that happen? Who's responsible for the Taliban coming to power in Afghanistan?
And two of those comparisons you're reading, by the way, the Uyghurs and the Rohingya, those are genocides.
Those are two
genocides. He throws in genocides.
Actual genocides.
Can't be. I didn't see people in the streets saying it.
I mean, I'm speechless. I shouldn't be. I know maybe I sound naive that Blinken has done this. We're still sending arms to Israel. So if far too many Palestinians are suffering in Gaza and the West Bank, why aren't we responsible for that?
Because Blinken says that there's no proof that Israel
we are responsible for the women being oppressed in Afghanistan because we pulled out of Afghanistan. We bear at least partial responsibility for that. We're not doing it. We're not the Taliban, but we knew that this was going to happen and we let it happen anyway, right?
The answer is that Tony Blinken says that there's no proof that Israel intentionally violated international humanitarian law. David Cameron says the same thing. So the answer to your question is it's an accidental genocide. We believe we are complicit in an accidental genocide.
Yeah, of a growing population.
It's unintentional.
The only genocide in which there will be more sided people at the end of 2025 than there were at the end of 2022. That's how genocidal this is. You know, I thought we Jews were good at things, but apparently we suck at genocide. apparently we're good at science, win a lot of Nobel Prizes. We developed ways. We had
But we have not
American Jewish novelists.
We have not a single Nobel Prize in
genocide. I know. Well, you can always hope. You can always hope that we're going to get there. Speaking of great Jewish novelists, the recommendation I want to offer today, though I'm only halfway through my second read, I read it as a teenager, I'm reading it now, is Isaac Bashevis Singer's Satan in Gorey, an extraordinary, powerful, folk-like novel about a town in 17th century Poland after the original Khmelnytsky pogroms, which were the first time, the word pogrom really originates with these efforts at extirpating Jews in Poland after a century of living there relatively peacefully. And what happens when a false messiah, the real false messiah, Shabtai Tzvi, arises in Poland to claim that he is the Messiah foretold by Isaiah, and that he will be leading the Jews to redemption and Judgment Day. And the evil that breaks out in this town as the suffering peoples there begin to believe that they are on the verge of God's judgment and their deliverance. It is so controlled, contained, coiled, powerful. It's almost overwhelming, and so I recommend it to everyone who hasn't read it, and I recommend it to people who have read it but haven't read it in many years. That's Satan in Gorey by Isaac Bashevis Singer. Very easily gotten on Kindle. So we'll be back tomorrow. For Abe, Seth, and Matt, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.